Okay.
Hi, good morning everyone. Welcome to the VARC conference. These two sessions that are in this room for this morning are organized by the PHAIR Society, and I am the president of the PHAIR Society. I'm Dr. Christoph Dont. I'm a social psychologist at the University of Kent, and the PHAIR Society is an organization that focuses, international organization that focuses on research and education on human-animal relations, veganism, effective animal advocacy, and today we're hoping to kind of share some of our research findings with you and find it interesting, right? We kick off with a session from two social developmental psychologists, if I can call them that. Luke McGuire on my left side here, right side here, from the University of Exeter, and on this side, Jared Piazza from the University of Lancaster. And they will do a joint presentation, if I understood that correctly.
Yes.
Because they've been collaborating a lot on research topics related to how children view animals once, when in their life they start feeling a bit of cognitive dissonance around meat consumption.
You're stealing my intro.
And that's all I will say, Jared. Yeah, these are both experts in this area, so and I'm sure they will take it away.
All right, thank you, Christoph. Yeah, really great to be here. Hello, everyone. Yeah, really humbling to be here as well. Yeah, so Luke and I are gonna do a kind of badminton style talk here, where we're gonna be kind of, I'll talk for a little bit. He'll talk for a little bit. Oh no, we don't have to hand off the mic. You got a mic, great.
Don't think so.
And hasn't fully been rehearsed, but we'll see. I think it's gonna go fine. We know what slides we need to cover.
You guys know
so.
the two Ronnies, right?
I have just been introduced to this. This was a new thing for me, so I don't think I can operate at that level. But so yeah, we're both psychologists. I would say I'm a social psychologist with an interest in developmental. Luke, I think you would say you are a developmental psychologist
With an interest in social.
with an interest in social. There we go. Oh, so now we are doing this bit, aren't we? Okay. We're both interested in studying people's attitudes towards animals, particularly how people's attitudes towards using animals, particularly with this very widespread use of eating animals. And we're interested in how the psychology of this, how people can be kind of fine with doing this, and how this develops across the lifespan, the psychology of eating animals, and that's what we'll be talking about today. We're not advocates, but vegan advocates, but through this PHAIR Society, we do work closely with advocates. We're very keen to learn from advocates and learn from you all how we can. Our research can be better informed by advocacy, how we can support the movement through our research. So we're very keen to hear from you as well today. So we've set it up so we will have a few Mentimeter. Psychologists, we like asking questions. So we will be polling you and we would like to hear from you as well, and we'll have time at the end for questions as well. So let's get started. I do have the clicker, so I can advance it. So this is the situation we all find ourselves in as scientists, and as advocates. That it's really difficult, right, to get people to go vegan, let alone reduce their meat consumption. And we all know, sort of globally, unfortunately, meat consumption is still on the rise. I've got this stat here. I don't know exactly how they work this out, but global meat revenue projected for 2030 is to increase to be over $2 trillion in USD, where the plant-based alternative market is just a kind of sliver of that in terms of its projections. So we're really interested in understanding, well, why is it? Why is this so hard for people to change their eating habits? And there's been a kind of surge of interest in this, in psychology in particular. The psychological sciences of studying this. And over, I'd say, the past kind of 2 decades, there's been a real interest, and we've been part of this movement within psychology to understand the kind of barriers that people face. And some of the kind of major barriers that have been studied, and some of these will be probably maybe unsurprising to you. People are very attached to meat, right? So in terms of the hedonic value of meat and the pleasure that people get, they have strong emotional attachments, historically, culturally, personally, And people even form identities, particularly men, the link between masculinity and meat. People can form strong identities around eating meat. So that's one thing that's a barrier. Motivated cognition, because people are so attached to meat, because they enjoy it so much, they're often motivated to defend eating it. And this leads to a number of different psychological consequences. One, some of which we'll be talking about today. One thing, for example, is that it will distort the way people reason and think about the animals that we use for food. Also, people have sort of ready-made, they've learned these sort of justifications that they have in support of eating meat, that they argue that eating meat's necessary, that it's normal, that it's natural, that it's nice. And people who believe that feel less guilty about eating meat. So these justifications do work to keep people eating it. Meat-related cognitive dissonance. So even if you can get people to feel a little bit of sort of conflict over eating meat and feel some cognitive dissonance about it, it's psychologically easier for people to just convince themselves that they don't need to make the change, that they have good reasons to continue doing it, than actually to go on and make that change and change their behavior. That's the harder road to travel. And then speciesism. So as a species ourselves, we tend to elevate the concerns, the interests of our own kind over that of other species. And we have that, so we can argue that we have a kind of pro-human bias, and also so a bias towards our own kind, but also certain species of animals that we like and prefer, like dogs, of course. Oh, this is where I hand it over to you.
Thank you. So Jared's very nicely set up some of the kind of key psychological factors that we're going to cover in the next 30 minutes or so. So what about attempts that have been made to change the minds of adults? So this is very recent from this year paper that has put together, I think 35 or 36 studies that have been done with interventions to try and change people's behavior. So the really nice thing about this paper is that it just includes studies that have follow-ups where people's actual meat-eating behavior is measured. So that's really nice because it goes beyond studies that have been done that just measure people's intentions, right? Because in psychology, very classic finding is there's quite a big gap between what people say they intend to do and what they actually do. And the finding of this paper, unfortunately, is that these interventions have not been massively successful in changing people's actual behavior. This tests different kinds of interventions, psychological interventions, kind of nudges in canteens, that kind of thing. So if you put the vegetarian option at eye level, does that change people's behavior? Persuasion, so giving people information, does that change people's behavior? The answer is not really. Sorry to have a very depressing start to the talk on a Saturday, but it's important to know, but reasons to be hopeful. So one of the conclusions of this paper is actually that there are other things that have not yet been tried, so with adults, so I don't want to dampen things too much, but the important point is it's hard to change the minds of adults and their behavior. First Mentimeter. Yes, this is like being in school. So please go to either this QR code if you are technologically proficient, or menti.com, and then you can enter.
It's wrong for people to pull out their phones during the middle of it.
That's all good. You can just go on TikTok or whatever. It's fine. We don't mind.
Okay. And then
Look at your Instagram reels. So you can exit and go to Mentimeter. You can do it anyway because the code will be on there.
It will come up, won't it?
Yeah.
All right, so
My glamorous assistant Jared will bring this up.
Here we go.
So our first question, how old were you when you first thought about stopping eating meat? 5 to 11 years old, 12 to 16, 17 to 25, or 25 plus?
Like a carnival or something.
We need like the countdown music.
Yeah, like we're supposed to make a prediction.
You can scan this.
So here, you can scan here. There's also, if you're not getting the QR code to work, you can go to the website and enter the number. Interesting.
This is nice. This will provoke some discussion.
Here we go. We should have got this. We should have got ethics approval so we could use this in a study.
We should have had it. We needed an under 5 category for
That's
our
true. Yeah.
guest here at the front. All right, this is nice. So we have a good distribution. I mean, this, let's face it, a bit of a biased room, shall we say. But you know what? I'm gonna drop some data here, which might actually suggest that it's not so biased. So we see many of you thought about this probably up until the age of 18. Back to the slides.
Next to the slide. Oh, back to the slides.
Back to the
not
oh,
next.
there is another. You're right. There's another question.
I think there's one more question that
open-ended.
Yeah.
What got you thinking about this issue and stopping? Try not to give like a paragraph-long answer if you can.
And if you can remember, I guess, for some of those who
If you can
at
remember,
5, I mean, possibly.
But if you were 5, maybe it was a very
We got
emotive moment.
things coming in.
Okay, friends, partners, relatives, animals, that's a simple one.
I wish we could see this broken down by age group. That would have been. I don't think Mentimeter can do
Life science here, folks. You can, I think, can you scroll down, Jared? Because these are just coming in
they're
and
flooding in. Aren't
there
they?
we go.
Yeah.
Oh, what was? Okay.
We'll have to
Realized animals were killed for food. That's going to help us make our talk. Thank you.
maybe we can post this later on the Whova. If I can
Yeah,
figure out
yeah.
how to use the Whova app, then maybe we can share this later.
Realizing chicken nuggets came from real chickens. Many adults do not realize this.
Okay, so now
Sweet.
back to,
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. That's very enlightening.
back to the slides.
So, back to the slides. That's a lot of tabs, Jared.
I shouldn't have been in charge of the tab. What? There we go.
All right. So, the reason I asked you to do that was to see how closely you aligned with this recent, well, very recent, so recent it's not even out yet, but will be out soon in the PHAIR Journal. Another bit of promo for Christoph. So this is a paper that we've just conducted where we asked a sample of 18 to 21-year-olds, current 18 to 21-year-olds, in the UK. When you were younger, did you ever think about stopping eating meat? I first did this with 100 people, and the finding surprised me so much that I thought I better collect some more data to see if that's a real finding. So Jared can click on. This is basically what we found. So we had our initial sample of just over 1,000 young people in the UK. And what we found was that 516 of them told us that when they were younger, when they were in school, they actually thought about stopping eating meat. That was such a high percentage that was why I was surprised, because that was the percentage in the 100 sample, and I thought, okay, there's no way. So we replicated that with this much larger sample. And the really interesting thing is that actually 275 of those people did stop eating meat for some period of time, whether it was days, weeks, months, years, or indeed the sort of 70 or so who were still vegetarian or vegan to this day. So this, I think, raises kind of two important points. One, young people are thinking about this issue, so this is an interesting audience for all of you to consider. But also, there's leakage in this pipeline at every step, right? So half of the people who think about it don't actually stop, and then a big chunk of the people who do stop go back to eating meat. So there's interesting things to consider there. So that leads us nicely to our kind of bigger questions we're going to talk about for the remainder of the talk. So how are children different? They're thinking about this issue. How does their psychology differ from that of adults? Are there these kind of windows of opportunity for advocacy? So the research that we've done so far, this is an early field. It's kind of emerging, right? So we've only done 5 years of work on this, so there's still a lot we don't know, but certainly we have evidence that children appear to be less speciesist, less likely to categorize animals as food, less motivated in the ways that Jared was already talking about, and give different or fewer kinds of justifications for eating animals. And we're going to talk a little bit about how much they might be aware of some of the kind of processes involved in this in terms of food production. A caveat to this is that adolescence is a more complicated period, and I imagine secondary schools are a place where you might have more opportunities as advocates, so we should talk a little bit about that as well. Final caveat with all of this is that we are mostly talking about children in the UK, right? The US, Poland, Spain, these are the places where this research has taken place so far. So there's definitely a need for cross-cultural stuff. Okay, so first of those points, children being less speciesist than adults. So as Jared's already talked about, this idea of speciesism, that your moral worth, your status, is determined by which species you belong to, is a long-standing idea from moral philosophy and psychology as well. So this is something that has been studied in children in the last 5 years. So we've got another Menti to go back to momentarily, but I'll explain the task to you. So this we've taken from this paper by Matty Wilkes and colleagues here. So in this study, what they did was to show children who were 5 to 9 years old in the US, and adults as well, these kinds of dilemmas. So imagine that you're facing these two sinking ships. In the kind of even version, we've got one ship that has a human on it, one ship that has a dog on it. Who's driving the dog boat? We've been debating this, we don't know. And then these things, there's varied conditions, right? So the number of animals can increase, the number of humans can increase. We've got all different iterations.
The type of animal.
And the type of animal, so it can be dogs or pigs. So now we go back to Mentimeter.
Let's see what
same
you
link.
would do in this situation.
Again, our very biased audience.
I'm really keen to see.
I wonder what's going to happen
here. We got a very one version of this task where you can save one person or 10 pigs.
Or you can't
and there's
decide.
3 options. Or if it's a real dilemma for you and can't decide, that is an option.
It is the same link as before, so you should just be able to.
Yeah. It's a very good question.
I'm afraid moral dilemmas have no context.
They often have this kind of low, mundane realism, and you kind of have to forget some of this and just concentrate on who you gonna prioritize.
Did you have a question as well?
That's good. So you're worried that they're being transported to be. Yeah.
This is an act of God. Right. Fire.
No, they're being transported back home. Let's say, somewhere nice. They're vacation.
But now you've changed the task. You can't do that.
Well, everyone's going at the same place.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, are we happy with?
Yeah. Can anybody say why they would anybody like to justify their decision? Oh, okay.
So what did you say? You chose.
Can't decide.
Can't decide.
Yeah. Numbers, somebody said.
You're forced in this situation though to act, right? You have something. You have. So the boat's going down. So you have to. Really, I think it's set up that way, right? Where if you don't act, then both are lost, basically. Yeah.
Anyway. Again, perhaps it's unsurprising that this room has more of a can't decide bent to it. So let's see what children and adults did in Matty's data.
Yes, here we go. Sorry, it went back.
It's all right.
Yeah.
So this is what children's responses look like. So the blue is save the humans, the yellow is save the animal, the other animal, and the red is can't decide. So what you can see here, and we've got dogs' dilemmas, pigs' dilemmas. Children are much less driven by species and much more driven by number, right? So they're a bit more utilitarian in that sense compared to adults who, again, it might not surprise you, basically
lots of blue, yeah.
Save the human every time, almost. Even if it's, one human versus 100 dogs or 100 pigs, they're more likely to go for the human. So a nice piece of evidence there. Children think differently about this issue. In the studies that I've been working on, we measure speciesism in a slightly different way, so less to do with these kind of abstract dilemmas, more to do with speciesism as a sort of personality trait. And these are the questions in the scale that we've been using with children, so things like animals are worth less than humans, how much do you agree or disagree with this? It's okay to keep animals in circuses. Many people seem to not know what a circus is anymore, so maybe that's a win for animal advocacy. Yeah, and testing new medicines, all these kinds of ideas. How much do children endorse these? And this is what some of our results look like. So how do children compare to young adults who are 18 to 21 and adults over the age of 25? And what you can see, so here the black dot is kind of the mean of each of the age groups. And in this data, you can see children are scoring lower on that scale than young adults and adults. So 2 different ways of measuring speciesism, and in both cases, children thinking differently from adults. And then more recently than that, we've looked at when is the kind of period of greatest change in speciesism. So what you can see here is speciesism is on this graph, and people's evaluations of eating meat are on the top graph, so how okay is it to eat animals. And we've split this sample, who are German adolescents and adults and children, into people who are vegetarian and people who are omnivorous. And what you can see is that early on, so when you are a child around 10 years old, the omnivorous and the vegetarian groups look the same, right? So their lines cross over with each other. But when you get into the sort of teenage years, especially when it comes to evaluating the morality of meat consumption, that omnivorous group kicks right up. So there's something going on there where when you're a teenager, the realities of what you're doing kick in, and you get towards stronger evaluations and changes in speciesism as well. So adolescence as a period to think about.
All right, this
you.
is over to me. Right, so we're also some research suggesting that children, the way that they categorize animals is different as well when we compare them with adults. And the story will be that they tend to categorize them less as food. And first, but why might this be a problem? Why thinking about animals as food, how is that kind of psychologically problematic? This involves basically objectifying animals, and we know from some research that's been done in psychology by people like Steve Lochnan that when people are thinking about animals as objects, as products, as you're not thinking about the animal as a kind of sentient, thinking, feeling being, and this is enough to reduce our concern for animals that we're thinking about as food. This was nicely shown in a study by Steve and his colleagues. They introduced, so this was with, I believe, British participants. They were introduced to a novel animal, the tree kangaroo. And in one condition, the animal condition, they're thinking about it as an animal. They get some information about the animal's habits and behaviors, and they're just thinking about it solely as an animal. There's another condition where they get that information about the animal, but they also learn that locally people will hunt and kill the tree kangaroo, use it for food, use it in their cuisine, and so the focus is more on thinking about the animal as food and categorizing it that way. They also had another food condition where this time the humans aren't responsible for doing the killing. There's a story about there's these really bad storms, knocks the tree kangaroos out of the trees, and they die, and then the humans go around to collect them and then use them in their cuisine. So again, thinking about them as food. And then another animal condition where it's the same story, they get knocked out of trees, but no mention of using them as food. So just the focus is on animals, but they kind of perish in this unfortunate way. And the main findings here is that, so they asked them to kind of make a mind judgment, to ascribe, think about the animal's capacity to suffer. And what we see in these two animal conditions, right, the bars are much higher. They're more likely to ascribe suffering capacity to the animals when they're thinking about them as animals with minds and being fully sentient. When we're thinking about the animal as food, those bars are lower, right? So it's suppressing this thought of them as thinking sentient beings. Okay? Oh, back over to you.
So what do children do? This is not the exact same task. We're actually working on a replication of the study that Jared's just shown you with children at the moment, but just to show you some data from something in the same realm. So this is from a study I did a few years ago, and we showed participants this kind of task here where they had different pictures that they could categorize. So a picture of a farmed animal, so a cow, a pig, or a chicken, a picture of a companion animal, and then some food items as well, one from an animal, one from a plant, and then a random object like a hat or a watch as a sort of common sense check. And they could drag these images into one of three boxes that were labeled food, pet, or object. This is a bit crude. I would do this differently now, but let's see what the data has to say. Yeah. So what you can see here, when you ask children to categorize the picture of the farmed animal, so we're just talking about the cow, the pig, or the chicken, they're much more on the fence about where this animal should belong. So does it go in the, most people think of this as a pet, or most people think of this as food? Hello to our guest speaker. When you ask the same thing to young adults, they're much more sure about what's going on, although not entirely. There's still some people who say it's more in the pet box. And then adults who are over the age of 25, it's a pretty stark divide. Most of them will say, yeah, that belongs in the food box. Bearing in mind, this is not a picture of food, this is a picture of the animal, right? So again, children have a different kind of categorization going on here compared to young adults and adults.
Oh. That's right. We had this other question to launch it.
Nice.
Back over to you.
What was the age limit for the children in that category?
9 to 11.
For yeah. All right, and how do I find it? Oh yeah, there it is. Okay, so that was the last one. Here we are.
Here we go.
This question, yes. So, is it worse to kill a highly intelligent animal than a less intelligent animal?
It's going to
It's
be
a moral evaluation here we're making. There's three options. I know it's quite small, but I think it's bigger on your screen. Yeah. So it's worse to kill the intelligent animal, worse to kill the less intelligent. Intelligence does not matter when it comes to killing.
Shocking results from this room.
I usually don't give this option in my studies. Yeah.
You all have a childlike joy.
Some saying. Yeah, the more intelligent. Okay, great. Thank you for engaging with that. Let's go see what the average omnivore thinks in the UK, if I can get back in. So this was a study that I did with Steve Lochnan, where basically, yeah. So we want, yeah. How do meat eaters, how does the impact of learning about the intelligence of an animal that we use for food, impact on our moral concern for them? What we did in this study was basically they get introduced to one of three animals. They were pigs, tappers, and an alien animal. This is thinking about like in the distant future we discover a planet and there's this new species. They got information about the intelligence of these animals, and so they got one of the three animals to think about, and either they're learning about the great intelligence of the animal, or they're learning that the animal's not so smart. And the thing to kind of point out is that for all of our participants, it's just the pigs who they themselves, and we confirm this, they all were omnivores who ate pork and ham and so on. It's just the pig that they personally consume themselves. They learn that all these animals are being used as food, but the tappers, it's in South America where they're not from. They're not involved. And then, of course, the travelins, this is an alien planet. Of course, they're not there, and they're not consuming meat from that animal. And in this study, they went on to learn that these animals are not treated so well in the context of food production, and they have to make this kind of moral evaluation. Having read this report, how bad do they feel about either pig or tappers or travelins being kind of mistreated in this way? And this is what we found for tappers and for travelins, the animal that they don't consume themselves. Yeah, they learned that the animal was the more intelligent the animal is, the worse they feel, the more they judge it wrong to treat the animal this way than if they'd learned the animal was not so intelligent. Sorry, I'm just realizing maybe I'm not Yeah, but I think we're being recorded, so I don't know how much of this is going in the can. Um, I'll try to get it, yeah, and more in front of my mouth here. Yeah, mic discipline, yeah. That was supposed to be more impactful. Now it's not so impactful, but the results were very different for the pig. Basically, this information now about the intelligence of the pig is not influencing their moral concern for it. They're not updating their moral concern for pigs, learning that they're intelligent. And the key thing about this study, the important thing here is, it's not that they're being skeptical about the information. So we did measure how they had to make ratings of how intelligent the animals were based on the information they got, and they're rating pigs just as intelligent as the tappers and the travelins based on that information. So the information's going in, they're accepting it, but that's not leading them to update their moral concern for pigs. So they're being very strategic here in their responding to the animal that they consume. And so we can ask, what about children? Do they show these kind of strategic psychological maneuvers that adults are really good at? We explored this, so Heather Hensler-Kozachenko and I explored this in a study with children in the UK, comparing them with British meat eaters. And they learned about two different animals, one that we consume as food, the chickens, another that we don't. Kakapo, maybe a few of you are familiar with this animal, flightless bird from New Zealand. And they, again, got information about the intelligence of the animal, or learned that the animal wasn't so intelligent, and they had to make another moral judgment here. How bad is it to kill either a chicken or a kakapo to eat as food? And with the adults, we basically replicate our findings from that other study that I talked about. So adults are we're basically at floor here. A smart chicken, they're not feeling very bad about killing, maybe unsurprisingly. Smart, and certainly more concerned about the killing of the smart kakapo. If they're learning that the kakapo is not so smart, they're not feeling as bad as when they learn that the kakapo is smart. So they're, again, using that information to update their moral concern for kakapos. These bars are no different. We're basically at floor. No concern for the chicken, whether it's smart or not smart. What do children do? Well, already you can see with the gray bars here, they're overall more concerned about the killing of these animals, and even the green bar is higher than the adults. And the results are very similar whether it's the animal smart or not smart. Overall, they're more concerned than the adults. There is still a little bias towards the animal that they don't use for food themselves. But we can kind of conclude here, there's no evidence of them sort of strategically responding to this information about animal intelligence. And they are showing a greater kind of sensitivity overall for killing animals to use for food. Do children also give maybe different or fewer justifications for eating animals? Well, what do adults do in this regard? So this is going back a few years. We were inspired by the, probably most of you have read Melanie Joy's book, The Introduction to Carnism, where she talks about the 3 N's. We were curious to test some of her theorizing and see how do people morally justify meat consumption. So we just asked people, these were American young adults or adults in this study, why is it okay to eat meat? So give us a kind of moral justification for why it's okay. And the main things that, there was a number of things that were said. We looked at the responses and coded them, and we ended up seeing that the kind of lion's share of things that came up related to what we call the 4 N's. So this is that eating meat is natural, normal, necessary, and nice. So necessary was the most common argument. These are arguments about appealing to the sort of nutritional value of meat, that our bodies need the protein as humans. Nice, these were arguments about basically appealing to the hedonic value of meat, that people get pleasure from it. Some really absurd comments like just appealing to the taste of bacon as a kind of moral argument. These kinds of things. Natural, that these arguments about humans being natural carnivores, that we're at the top of the kind of natural food chain, these kinds of arguments. And normal, so just appealing to the ubiquity of meat, that a lot of people consume meat, culturally it's normal. They were raised eating it, these kinds of things. So that's what adults do and say to justify meat. And one thing that we found from this study as well, the more people endorse these ideas, the less guilty they feel about eating meat. So it serves this purpose of sort of, helping reduce any kind of concern about it. And what do children do? What's the story with children?
So this is from a different sample here, and these, in the data we had, these were the 5 categories that came out. So natural, necessary, and normal, as Jared's already said. Jared also had this humane slaughter category, didn't talk about it then, but that's basically these kinds of things. People say, you know, it's okay.
Doesn't start with N.
Doesn't start with N. Doesn't fit with his regime. So as long as you know it comes from a company that doesn't mistreat animals, there's humane options for meat, things that you will definitely have heard if you speak to anybody on the street. And then a very simple, straightforward animal welfare kind of reasoning, mostly for people who said it was not okay. On to the results. So this is looking at adults compared to children. On the right-hand side here, you can see the people who said it's not okay to eat animals. And their reasoning, kind of unsurprisingly, whether they're an adult or a child, relies mostly on this kind of welfare category. Some necessary, but that's people who say it's not necessary. And then the interesting stuff in terms of age is in the people who said it's okay to eat meat. So there what you get are age effects where adults are much more talking about this naturalness idea. So it's kind of natural, we're carnivores, we're evolved, so on and so forth. And also talking about this humane slaughter category. So it's not really seen in children. Adults use that kind of justification, which again sort of implies they have some access to this knowledge about factory farming that requires them to have a justification in the opposite direction. And then the other interesting thing is that even the children who say it's okay to eat meat do talk about animal welfare. So there's a bit of kind of blurring of the lines and some confusion there probably going on.
Okay.
I think that's you.
Yeah. But at the same time as well, we're also finding, as you might expect, that children, certainly before adolescence, are less knowledgeable about food production. When we talk about food production and what's required, for example, to experience any kind of conflict over thinking about animal products and the consumption of animal products, there's at least 2 aspects that we need to consider. And the first is food origins knowledge. So this is a program of research that Vicki Simpson's been leading on. She's right there in the audience. And so one of the tasks we have children do, this is children as young as 4 up to 16 years of age, is basically just we give them a list of different food items, and they need to tell us, does this come from a plant, does this come from an animal? And even at age 4 to 6, what you're seeing here are percentage of children who make incorrect responses. So for example, about 20% of the 4 to 6-year-olds think that eggs are coming from plants and not animals. But for the most part, milk, 100% they're getting this correct. And then certainly by middle childhood, they've got this nailed down. They know where their food is coming from, at least in terms of the source. Coming from plant or animal. Maybe cheese is giving some of our 7 to 11-year-olds, a few of them, some problems. But for the most part, they understand food origins. But that's just half the story. The other thing that you sort of need to be aware of, and that we saw in the polling of people's reasons for going vegan, to have that kind of conflict over the consumption of animal products, you also need this kind of processes knowledge to be aware of the morally problematic aspects of food production. And so in this task, this was an open-ended task. They were given a few situations. They basically had to tell us basically what happens between, there's a cow and we get the milk from the cow, what happens in between, same with eggs and pork sausage from pigs. And the general story here is that it's really not until around adolescence and certainly young adulthood where they exhibit this greater understanding of this processes knowledge regarding dairy, egg, and meat production. It's the younger children are not showing kind of much knowledge about this. So things like being aware that the confinement of animals, that dairy cows need to be kind of repeatedly impregnated in this to get milk, these kinds of aspects. Okay, and then we're nearing
Okay,
the end.
We're nearly done. We're going to get there with some time for questions, which is good. So what? That's a good question, isn't it? So, but yeah, children and adolescents are thinking differently about other animals than adults are. Like that's all the data we have is pointing in that direction. We are but humble developmental psychologists, so we would be loath to tell you what to do. But if you want to take any of our thoughts away, adolescence seems to be like a pretty important window of opportunity, right? So if you remember that pipeline I showed at the start, there's a lot of leakage going on from people who think about stopping eating meat to people who actually successfully do so. The age of that is 13 years old. That's the age where people say that was when I first stopped. So 13 to 18 is absolutely crucial. A bunch of different reasons for that. We're just kind of speculating here. I mean, autonomy over food choice is much more prevalent when you're a teenager, right? There's kind of, hopefully, fewer gatekeepers if you've got a supportive family. And maybe this food systems knowledge that Jared's been talking about. But we would say, yeah, cognitive dissonance is a bit of a double-edged sword because you can get backlash effects in the other direction there if you go too strong. But at the same time, as I was saying earlier on, caveat to this, it's complicated because this is also the period where people are becoming more speciesist and learning these kinds of ways to justify and resolve their dissonance. So it's a complex one to jump in on. But we didn't want to leave on a negative, so things to be, again, hopeful about. This is some really interesting work, not in the domain of meat consumption, but there's been some really good work in the domain of climate change concern and behaviors as well, that children actually do foster this concern amongst their parents. So you might think, well, what's the point of trying to change the minds of children? They don't have any purchasing power, they can't do anything. That's not true. They actually are successful agents in changing the minds of their kind of adult carers. Do you want to talk briefly about this?
Well, yeah, this is I guess the flip side of it also that, oh, sorry, I need to talk into the mic, that also young people, so this was a study I did with Rebecca Gregson where we looked at plant-forward dieters, so people who are sort of transitioning and trying this out, and if they had the more they had the support of their family in that transition, the better they did. And we looked at sort of long-term outcomes in terms of their commitments. And so, yeah, on the kind of flip side, having the support of family and friends can also then help, plant-forward eaters to remain committed to those diets. So yeah, it's kind of the other side of it. They can, and we also saw some evidence of social influence as well. They were influencing their families because when they were engaging in that, and if they had parents who were willing to support them, they even sometimes would, participate in and join in that. Yeah.
So that brings us really to our final message, which is to think about supporting young people, right? So there's a lot of room here, I think, to think about young people. I know there are lots of groups in the UK already thinking about this in terms of advocacy efforts. I'm a bit loath to say, like, oh, you should start going into schools and showing horrifying footage. I don't really think that's probably the path here. As you saw, there's already a lot of natural inclination towards this idea of reducing meat consumption amongst young people. So I would be focusing on fostering that rather than trying to change the minds of the other half, because that would be a big swing in the right direction anyway, right? So how can you empower these adolescents who are already thinking about making changes? In our study, the only significant predictor of whether people successfully stopped eating meat was if their parents supported them, above and beyond all the other kind of psychological variables we had in the models. So if you're going to do anything, you've got to support those parents who might not want to change their own diet to help their children do so. And the number one reason people went back to eating meat was because they didn't want to inconvenience their family. So there is a massive opportunity there if you have more practical skills than me and Jared. And then also, I mean, something we've been talking about is this idea that children, for whatever reason we haven't cracked yet, children are thinking about this issue differently. And then somehow you get to being an adult who is capable of balancing all this kind of nuance and complexity about other animals. So there's another opportunity there for fostering this kind of concern that children already have later into life. I think that's our lot. Yeah. So thanks for your time. Thanks to our collaborators, and happy to hear your thoughts. Thank you.